And to all our participants now, we are going to start Subhashini Goda's presentation. And as an introduction, I want to speak a little bit about her background and the studies that she's been doing. Subhashini Goda is a Bharatanatyam artist and a poet from Chennai, India. With a background in English literature and varied movement practices, she is at the moment finishing her Erasmus Masters in Dance Knowledge, Practice and Heritage, Choreomundus. And her main research interests are performative practices from South India and the Indian diaspora, ritual transgression, political activism, migration, and memory. And today we are going to have her sharing a presentation entitled Rhythmic Variations in Bharatanatyam and Implementing Rhythm While Working with Diaspora Pathways in Trinidad. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and I'm gonna go ahead and make Subhashini our host for this session so that she can share any material that she needs to.
Perfect. Thank you, Jorge, and thank you, Francisco, for this. Hi, I'm going to quickly start with saying thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to everybody who's participating for staying and listening to this part of the lecture. Juan, thank you for the brilliant presentation before this. It's really nice because since yesterday I've been thinking how nicely there's been a thread that's weaving across different presentations. Although they all seem so varied in content, they all seem to have a very beautiful thread of connection with each other. So continuing with that connection, I'm going to be talking about the rhythmic system of Konnakol, which translates into Nattuvangam in Bharatanatyam syllabic recitation. And then I'm going to talk about Bharatanatyam in diasporic presentations and how we incorporate such rhythm in diaspora. So this, before I start, a couple of things. First is this work is a work in progress. It's just the beginning, especially the part with the diaspora, because I was in Trinidad for a very limited period of time. So I have not had the opportunity to go in depth with this kind of research. So it's a beginning, and I'm hoping to have a lot of questions from you all later so I can develop this much better. So that's the first. The second is I'm hoping to make it slightly informal and a little more like Juan. I also want to make it a little participative, if that's okay with you all. So if you're all willing, you can also move and you can also do some rhythm and we can have a good time. So that's that. My presentation is going to be a mix of a little bit of talking and some dancing. And I'm going to be ably assisted by Maho, who is going to appear any moment now on camera. That's Maho. Voila. So on to the presentation. So I would like to introduce Konnakol basically. I don't know how many of you are already accustomed to this word, but I'm probably going to start because I'm guessing it's a healthy mix of academics, practitioners, dancers, and I see some of my friends as well. So I'm going to introduce Konnakol. Konnakol is basically the rhythmic recitation system that is very particular to South India. Especially to this percussion instrument called a mridangam, which is a drum that's shaped like this. So as we play the mridangam, we learn something called the Konnakol, which is basically the beat of the drum that is imitated by the sounds that we make with our tongue and with our throat. So if I'm going to say tat, dhit, tum, nam, tat, dhit, tum nam tad dhit tum nam tad dhit tum nam tad tonum tad tonum tad tonum tad tonum tad tonum tad tonum, so on and so forth. So this is the basic recitation system of Konnakol. Within this, we have a lot of syllables. We call them nonsense syllables for the lack of translation. These syllables are basically syllables that sound very nice to the ear and are often a combination of three different sounds. The first sound is called the tullal, which is basically dhim, nam, tum, you know, that sound that has that resonance in the end. And then there is the tungal, which is called the sleep sound, which is dha, dhi, ta, ta, you know, they just stop. They don't really continue. They don't resonate after that. And then there is the third sound, which is called the agaval, which is basically a continued sound. So ta, dhi, nam. So if it goes in a continued manner, we call it agaval. And often Konnakol is a combination of these three different sounds coming together to form the whole pattern. Nattuvangam is an offshoot of Konnakol that is specifically created for Bharatanatyam. We have an instrument that goes with it. It's called the Nattuvangam again. So it's just two cymbals put together and it makes only two sounds, this and this. And everything we do is a combination of these two sounds while we recite. So if I'm going to say tad-dit-tum nam nam tum dit, I'm going to do tad-dit-tum nam nam tum dit, or tad-dit-tum nam nam tum dit. So I can just play around with the beats, and we usually use the Nattuvangam and we recite as we go along. How we use this in Bharatanatyam is we start, when we teach students, we start basically with the dance steps itself being recited. So if I'm going to teach them the first step, which is basically feet, I'm probably going to demonstrate. It's much easier, trust me. So if I'm going to keep my feet like this and I'm going to say first step and the second step, I would always start with saying te, ya, te, ya, te. So even as I'm teaching them the dance, I start teaching them how to recite the syllables as they go along for the dance. So even as I continue the speeds, they also learn to say it in different speeds. So they say te, ya, te, ya, te, ya, te, te. So it goes on like that in different speeds. So this is the basic. Now we have 7 tadas. Tada is the beat systems. So we have 7 tadas that encompass this. Let me see if I can share the screen. Yes. So, like I said, there are 3 main parts of the 7 tala system. First is called the lagu, the drutham, and the anudrutham. I'm trying to sort of be linear, but it's very difficult for me. I am not a very linear person, but I'm trying. So the lagu is basically when you count your talas, when you count your beat system, the lagu is basically when you beat and you count the fingers. So this is one form of counting and keeping the beat. Then you have something called a drutham, which is basically when you beat and turn your hand. So it's just 2 counts, always. Drutham is constant. And then there's something called an anudrutham, which is again constant, which is just a beat, just 1. So the drutham and anudrutham are constant, which is 2 beats and 1 beat. But the lagu, because if it's beating and counting, it has variations. And we have very set variations. There's a variation of 3, there's a variation of 4, 5, 7, and 9. So if it's 3, we beat and count thrice. So 1, 2, 3. Can you all see me? I don't think so. Yeah, maybe you can see me. So if you're going to beat and count, voila. So if you're going to beat and count, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. If I'm going to beat and count to 4, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm going to beat and count to, let's say, 5, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So these 5 variations are the basic and they are the most important. Along with this, we have the 7 talas that I already spoke about. The first is when you beat and then you count and turn, then you beat again, then you beat again. So it's a beat, count and turn, beat, beat, which is called a dhruva tala. So each of these talas have a name. I'm probably going to just explain the first one or the second one so that you sort of get the example. So if I'm going to beat and then beat and turn, then beat again, then beat again. Let's say if it's going to be in the rhythm of 4 beats each. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, beat and turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, again 1, 2, 3, 4. Sort of clear? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's try an example. I'm gonna go back to this, sharing my screen. So I'm gonna give you guys the 7 examples. So when the first one is when you beat and count, then you beat and turn, then you beat and count, and then you beat and count again. The second one is when you beat and count, beat and turn, then you just beat and count again. The third one is when you beat and turn, and then you just beat and count. So the I, O, I, O, I, U, O, all that stands for the beat and the beat and turn and the beat, just that. So I'm going to try asking you all to try to count, if you can unmute and count, let's say Triputa, which is when you beat and count and then you beat and turn and then you again beat and turn. Okay. So I want you guys to beat and count to 5. So that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there's 2 turns. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Can we all try that again? I'm going to stop sharing. Beat and count to 5. Beat and turn, beat and turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Beat and turn, beat and turn. So the same thing if I'm going to do for 9, for instance. How is it going to go? It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Beat, turn, beat, turn.
Oof. Okay.
Yes. Make sense? All right. So like I said, the beat and turn is a constant. Just the beat is a constant. The beat and count is the one that keeps changing in 5 different variations. So if I'm going to put all those variations in place and see, totally we have 175 different variations and complex rhythms that we can follow into. So these 175 is the basic for Bharatanatyam that we usually follow when we dance. So the most common one is what we call the Aditala, which is also an offshoot of the beat and count and beat and turn and beat and turn. But when you beat and count to 4, it's called the Adi. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As you can see, it's the most common. We call it the Sarvalagu, which basically means it's the universal beat. Everybody can like get in groove with it. It's the most normal thing. Every time you hear it in the clubs, anywhere, you can hear beats of 8. It's the most common beat, which is why we call it the Sarvalagu, which means the universal beat. Okay, so that is for the Tala. Now, the reason I wanted to bring in Talam is because I feel like when I went to Trinidad, the first thing I had to change was the system of composing choreographies with these talams. Because if I were in India, when you learn Bharatanatyam is usually composed of learning history, mythology, culture, everyday rituals, language, music, plus the percussion. So it's all given to you in like a complete module. It's not just dance that you learn. It's a lot of other components that go with the dancing that you learn that contribute to the dance itself. So even the beat cycles and all that, you go along learning in the music plus in the dance. And even in mythologies, they figure somewhere. In rituals, they figure. So you sort of learn them completely as a whole something. But when you go outside India, you realize somebody's unmuted. But anyway, when you go outside India, you realize that some of these things cannot be taken for granted, because when you're trying to talk about these systems, a lot of people are not familiar with it. I'm sure right now is a good example. I'm sure I was having a hard time trying to communicate what I was trying to say. And this was the biggest challenge when I realized that teaching rhythm to another person from another movement system or another system of practice, I think this is the biggest challenge we all have. How are we going to communicate this rhythm to another? And the answer was, one is on a very, I wouldn't say romantic manner, but I believe this is something that was given even in the conversation yesterday, I think in the first lecture, when we were talking about it, there was this idea of everyday life's rhythm. And it suddenly struck a chord with me, because that was the first thing I had to change when I went to Trinidad. My everyday rhythm, as opposed to what I was in India, where everything is so fast, or where there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people, there's constant commotion, everything is very different. As opposed to Trinidad, where suddenly everything seemed to have a lot of time, despite the traffic, despite the people, everything. Suddenly Trinidad is very laid back. So my rhythm cycle completely changed when I went there. So it was no longer that dit tum nam, it became that dit tum. It was like that. I could literally feel my body moving to that kind of a rhythm and not this one. So that was the first change. And that is how the way I was composing my choreographies also began to change until I went to Trinidad. I mean, after I went to Trinidad. So while in India, there was a particular rhythm scale I would stick to. For example, if I'm going to do a Jathi, if I'm going to compose a scale, I would probably start with the first speed, then I'd go to the second speed, then I'd go to the third speed, then I'd go have like intricacies in the third speed, then I'd come back to the first speed, then I'd finish. But in Trinidad, I had to redo this. because I realized that even the audience would not actually relate to something like that. So I had to move according to how they felt, which is why we started working with rhythms that were slightly different, but within the same adaptation. So in an Indian context, one of the most traditional jatis is what we call the Trikala Jati. I'm probably going to say it to you now so that you see the difference. So the Trikala Jati would totally go something like ta rita rita kena ta kanaka jam jam rita rita kena ta kanaka jam jam ta rita rita kena ta kanaka jam jam rita rita kena ta kanaka jam jam ta rita kena jam ta rita kena jam ta dinta kaditta kadita kadita ta dinta kaditta kadita kadita ta dinta kaditta kadita kadita done. But in Trinidad, suddenly, because my students there, and when I was working with the choreographers there, I was like, this cannot work. This really cannot work. So we will have to redo this. We will have to make students see the beauty of this rhythm, but with their body and with the way they see life and with the culture that they have imbibed, which is why I started transforming it a little bit. And it also helped that the dance form that we were practicing, we had a common point. It was Bharatanatyam. But the more important thing was the idea that we were choreographing was not pertaining to religion. Therefore, it did not really close a lot of doors for us. So we were working with mental health issues, and we had to choreograph something that was related to that as well. So the challenge was to bring in rhythmic syllables that will also bring in those kind of emotions into place. So we started working with that. And with that, we came up with, there are 5 variations that we traditionally do when we are working with the rhythm system in India called Jathi. So we sort of modified it to fit the Trinidadian context. So the Jathi in India, in the South Indian Konnakol system, is the endings of a particular long phrasal syllable recitation. So it has 5 parts. One is called the Sama, the second is Mridanga, the third is Damaru, the fourth is Shrotavaha, and the fifth is Gobucha. So the Sama is when you end all 3 the same way. So if I'm going to say tadittum nam tadittum nam tadikitatum tadikitatum tadikitatum, so tadikitatum tadikitatum tadikitatum, they're all equal. Done. The second is the Mridanga, which means it starts small, then it grows bigger, then it ends small again. So it's tadikitatum tadikitatum tadikitatum. So it's tadikitatum tadikitatum tadikitatum. And then there is a Damaru, which starts big, turns small, ends big again. So taddi ikitatum, taddi kitatum, taddi ikitatum. And then there is a Gobucha, which it starts big, but then it starts progressively getting smaller. So taddi ikitatum, taddi kitatum, tikitatum, kitatum, tum. So it just gets smaller. And then there is the Shrotavaha, which it gets progressively bigger, which is tum. Kittatum, taddi kittatum, taddi ikittatum, taddi kittatum. So it ends big. So we had to modify that to suit this context. And we were trying to grapple with the idea as to how to bring it. And that's when my friend who was choreographing the whole piece for her students, she suggested, I don't know if she's here, but she suggested that we could probably use this as a depiction for how the mind works and the senses, the 5 senses that we usually give to the mind. The sight, the sound, the sense, the taste, the touch. And so we started incorporating each of these to that, and we tried to choreograph around it. So if we had to do Sama, which is basically the mind being at peace kind of emotion, and we tried to associate it with feeling, with taste. So each of it we tried to associate with a different feeling, and each of it we choreographed according to that. So there was one where I think we had to say giving and taking, and that was the idea behind it. So we put it for Sama. So we did tat dhe kittatum, tat dhe kittatum, tat dhe kittatum. So we didn't want to break the barriers of Bharatanatyam, but at the same time we wanted to use gestures that were easier for the students to understand and the emotion that was easier for them to relate to. So the challenge was to convert Konnakol outside the cultural religious context that it has always been associated with. So this was our first experiment. The second experiment, I think, was understanding itself teaching methodologies for everybody, because this is not just for Bharatanatyam. I do believe that when you take a dance form outside a particular context and try to teach it from people from other contexts, it is very important to keep the nuances alive, but at the same time transform the art form and understand that the transformation is essential for the art form to survive. And it is what is going to help the art form grow as well as is. So we had to sort of find a balance between keeping certain traditions alive and making individual talent more elaborate. So this was one of our other experiments. And I think the biggest learning that this gave me was the idea that the moment an art form travels outside the diaspora, I think it becomes something that is beyond just one particular tradition or one particular group's art form. And I think this slightly pertains to what Jorge also was talking about yesterday about appropriation and things, because you cannot talk about appropriation beyond a particular point. Where does a point end when a dance is just somebody's stylistic variation, and where does a new art form begin? So we started seeing this diasporic practice of changing certain things for the art form as a way of perhaps creating another form in itself. So it was more of an understanding of where we can stop calling it Bharatanatyam and where we can start experimenting with making it another art form for that community to practice and that community to recreate for themselves. So I think Konnakol helped in that. And I think rhythm was the first thing that helped us to connect with each other in that manner. Because if we had started with expression, which is the other bigger part of Bharatanatyam, Bharatanatyam is always composed of two elements. The first element is the rhythm and the second element is the expression. So if we had gone ahead with the expression, it would have been very difficult because we had to first find common points of religion, we had to find common points of language, we had to find common points of mythology, and that would have made our practice a lot more complicated and difficult to relate to. But if we went with rhythm, like Maya Angelou says, everything in the universe is rhythm, everything dances. So we felt like rhythm had a connection that everybody could immediately relate to. And this also pertains to another idea that is very particular to the Konnakol system called the Layam, which I haven't touched yet, and I'm going to start about now because it's a really large topic. So Layam is basically what we think is the rhythm of the universe. So everything has Layam. For example, the seasons have a Layam. You know that they are constantly going to come and go. The sunset and the sunrise has a Layam. The earth spinning has a Layam. So all this is Layam. It is this rhythm that is very particular to the universe, that is constantly entwined in the universe. And the paradox is that Layam is constantly changing, but it is also constant in the sense that you know it is there. It's never going to end. It's just going to happen over and over again in a cyclical way. And what we do in Talam is to try to bring out this Layam in the beats that we are creating. So whatever we create is an imitation of what is there out there in the universe. So that way we believed that we could build a Layam with each other using this kind of universal conversation between each other. So that is how we tried to translate Konnakol from one language to another. The other experiment that we have tried here is with Maho, and Maho is not a Bharatanatyam practitioner. Some of you might already know her. She is into dance therapy. She does movement therapy, and she does contemporary dance. She's a fantastic dancer. So one of the interesting experiments we tried is to see how rhythm translates in other bodies as well, especially Konnakol, because I, as a Bharatanatyam dancer, I'm an insider. So I'm very used to certain influences from what I have learned from my past teachers. There is no way I can let go of those influences when I'm practicing. So in a way, I'm boxed in by some of those concepts that are very ingrained in my body, even if I'm not doing them consciously. But with Maho, the experiment was very interesting because when I was reciting Konnakol, I tried it once with a specific set, like how we do it back home, very traditional in 8 counts for 4 cycles. And then we tried to just free flow the rhythmic syllables and see how she moves. And we found this experiment very interesting because in the first, she was trying to accommodate to what I was saying constantly. So even if I said that, she was trying to accommodate her body to move according to what I was saying. But when I let it free flow and I said, okay, so I'm going to just say what I want and maybe you can just dance what you want. At some point, I started saying things according to how her body was moving. And then slowly, at some point, both of us started, even without realizing, having this game with each other where both of us were going along very beautifully in our own little rhythms that coincided very beautifully as well. So this was very interesting. This point of departure was very interesting for me because it sort of also helped me understand that this is perhaps how we can translate rhythms when we are teaching people who do not come from our movement practice. Maybe we can free flow rhythms and let them understand how it flows and then begin to box that concepts in. And I think there are two ways to learn, because when we learn it in Bharatanatyam, we always start with the boxed in. We are always learning the foundation, the very strict ways of tala. You're always like given so many concepts to learn. And then at one point, your teachers allow you to free flow. They say, okay, these are the concepts, you don't need them anymore. It's there in your body, you don't need them. You just now have to break these concepts and go on and try something new. But we were trying an experiment where she was allowed to try something new. And then at some point, she started allowing herself to come back to what I wanted her to do. So we were trying to work with this paradox, and maybe we can try it out right now. Sorry if I'm a little all over the place. That's pretty much how I am usually. So we're going to start with a traditional one, which is what we call a Trikala Jathi. And she's going to try to move according to my beats. Bhalam kutaka dikutaka tadingna tom rita rita kinna taka naka jam jam 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 rita kinna jam rita kinna jam tadin taka ditta kirtaka tarikita tom tadin taka ditta kirtaka tarikita tom tadin taka ditta. That was her trying to move to my beats. Now we are just going to free flow. Ditum ta ditum ditum ta ditum 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 ta ditum ta kita tum ta kita tum ta dikita ta dikita tum ta dikita ta vitta vitta ta vitta vitta ta vitta vitta kitum 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 ta vitta. So that was the other experiment we tried. I would love to hear what you all have to say about these two experiments, because every time we try, we have different results. But the one common thread of connection we realized was that the first one, most of the time she was moving to my beat, and the second one, most of the time I started moving to her beat, but at some point we started doing our own thing and we started coinciding with each other. So this is an example of what I wanted to say about understanding rhythm outside the very rigid South Indian Mridangam and Bharatanatyam context. The other one I wanted to do was try with all of you how we actually do the rhythm thing. Maybe if we can try the first 3 speeds of a particular way of recitation. This is just a takeaway. So if you're game for it, we can do that. So we're going to do 8 beats, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the usual. Usually what happens is if the first speed is, let's say, repeated 2 times, the second speed will be the double of the first speed, which means it will be done 4 times. And the third speed will be a double of the second speed, which means it will be done 16 times, and so on and so forth. So Konnakol is full on math. Trust me, as a kid, I never used to like it, but now I love it. So if we're going to try it in the first speed, I'm going to do ta, dhi, tum, nam, ta, dhi, tum, nam. I would love it if you can mute your unmute yourselves and try to say it as well. The syllables are ta, dhi, tum,
Tom.
nam.
Nam.
Okay, that's it. Ta, dhi, tum, nam. Everything comes from the gut. We always say, speak from the nabi, sing from the nabi. Everything for us is always from the gut. It's never from the throat. So you have to have that kind of a feeling every time you say it. After a while, you get used to it and you just say it. So it's ta, dhi, tum,
Tom.
nam,
Nam.
Nam.
Ta.
dhi, tum, nam.
Nam.
Second speed, ta,
Ta.
dhi, tum, nam,
Nam.
ta,
Ta.
dhi,
Di.
tum,
Tom.
nam,
Nam.
ta,
Tom.
nam,
Nam.
ta, dhi, tum, nam, 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 ta, dhi, it. Usually this does not change at all. This is very constant, but this keeps changing according to the beat. So you have to make sure this does not change according to how you're saying it. This is a very common mistake that we all do in the beginning. We always go that tom nam tad tom nam tad tom nam. So this does not change at all. This is constant, and this is like the lion. This is like the rhythm of the universe. This is constant. But what we say is what we do, our bodies. And within that, we try to play around with it. So I don't need to say even tadit tom nam. At some point, I can say tadit tom nam, tadit tom nam, tadit tom nam, kita tadit tom nam, kita kita tadit tom nam, tadit tom nam, takita tadit, takita tadit, takita tadit tom nam, tadit tom, tadit tom, tadit tom nam, tadit tom nam, tadit tom nam, tadit tadit. So I can play around with the variation. So 8 is always not just 8. It's 5 plus 3, it's 4 plus 4, it's 2 plus 6, it's 1 plus 7. So you can always play around with the beats. And this was the idea. I just wanted to make it a little playful. So I'm going to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhashini. Thanks, Maho, very much for this wonderful presentation. And so, as always, I'm going to encourage our participants connected already in the session to share their questions. You have two options. Either you raise your hand, use the option to raise your hand, or you just comment your question on the comment box, and I will read it out loud if you prefer so. And maybe I can start with a little question until people have a little time to gather their own. I think I was delighted to see all the interconnections that are starting to happen between one presentation and the other, as you mentioned. And I figured that now that we're speaking about rhythm, it's not only in singular but in plural. Some of the presenters, including you, are bringing all these layers of different rhythms that are connecting, either for the sake of a dance or the sake of singing or the sake of everyday life. And I was wondering if, when you were studying your experience in Trinidad, you already explained to us that the reason why people were dancing in a particular way and not in another was because of the rhythm of everyday life. But I was wondering if you afterwards kept comparing or contrasting these rhythms of daily life actions and the performance-based actions, because I'm still thinking about the presentation from yesterday by Joe Bergens, when he was speaking about this, like the ordinary actions and the extraordinary actions and how they might resemble or might have some connections that we're not very aware of. And so I wanted to know if you maybe got interested in that.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question you just asked me, because I was just thinking about it even during the lecture yesterday, particularly in times of the pandemic, and how much my dance and the way I interpret certain things about my dance have changed over time. Of course, I was in Trinidad for a very limited period of time, so I could observe things only during that period of time. Of course, I still have my friends there, and we still have everyday conversations, but I don't really get to see them dance, so I cannot really make a comparison. But I know my body, and I know how much the way I see certain things and the way my rhythm itself has changed, especially the last 4-5 months of the pandemic. The way I have started composing has also changed, because when I was in India, I think I was more interested in the mathematical intricacies of the composition itself. So I was going around playing with the math of it. I was going around playing, changing the constant talam systems and trying to be very intricate with the whole thing. But now with the continued space that we have had and the space for going inward, like Juan also talked about previously, and it starts manifesting sooner or later in how you are in everyday existence as well. And that sort of manifests in your dance as well. So I do not really work on intricacies anymore, and I'm more interested in trying to tune my body according to the rhythm around me, which is a very slow, monotonous, but at the same time very meditative kind of rhythm. So yeah.
Thank you, Subhashini. Now we're gonna go ahead with Juan, who has a question for you.
Yes.
Thank you for a cool presentation. I love your energy. and I have both a question and a request. So the question comes first, and that would be, if you have, because I mean, you're doing music with your mouth, right? It's like, for me, it's like you're playing a drum with your mouth. And I don't know if you've played, for example, with Africans or with people from other cultures, and how does that feel? You know, how does the Indian swing feel in relation to African swing, or how did you experience that? And the request is that you just do like a solo, you know, where you just where you drum like you were doing, just with the syllables.
With the syllables. Okay. I love the question, because this is what we've been doing the last 2 years with different kinds of people from different parts of the world. For instance, with Maho, who's been teaching me a little bit of swing criollo, or I've been dancing with Oyen a lot, who is from Nigeria, and she does. She's fantastic. So basically, like, we collaborate with different dancers, and we sort of, and this is the other thing, we've always found certain commonalities somehow in our rhythms that sort of go with each other sooner or later. And I think my training has also given me a lot of grounding for understanding other systems of rhythm very quickly and very easily. So I don't know if, I think when you practice a particular art form for almost 2 decades or 3 decades, certain rhythms become a very integral part of you, and they don't leave. Perhaps I noticed the problem of this when I was learning a little bit of Hungarian dancing, where I think their rhythm, especially when they beat the right leg and then lift the right leg, was very difficult for me to do, because that is not something that I'm used to embodying in my body. So there are certain things that become incredibly difficult. So they were sort of like a challenge. But most of the time when I was dancing with my friends, I think we found more commonalities with each other. And we sort of liked the fact that none of our rhythms were actually changing, but were more becoming multi-layered with ideas from each other over time. So yeah. Did that answer your question? Oh, cool. So for the request, maybe I will do a farans, which is basically the rhythm syllable that we use when we learn. Teachers usually teach this when they want you to learn both saying it properly and the speed as well. So we do it in 3 different speeds. Maybe I will do the third speed. So because it's, yeah, I mean, we don't have much time, I suppose. So I'll probably just do the third speed. So, no. Okay, I'm very confused what to do, because there's like a lot of parents.
I would just say, do whatever you want. I don't care what it is, because I know nothing about your music system. So just you know, spit it out. Spit it out. You know, just
Okay. So maybe we have something called Nandichol, which is basically a conversation between a mythological god and his Vahana, like, and his vehicle. So Shiva and his bull. And it's sort of like a give and take kind of a conversation. And maybe I will recite from that. Okay. So it's Nam Vita dinginnatum tanam dita dinginnatum tananam dita dinginnatum tam gitam takita dhim takita tum takita nam takita dikita tum kita nam kita tadikita takita tam nam takita kup dari kita takata dik tum nam takita kita tum tadanam takita kup dari kita takata didit tum nam tadita kita tum nam takita kup dari kita tata nam takita kup dari kita tati nam takita kup dari kita tata nam takita kup dari kita tata nam dita dinginnatum nam dita dinginnatum ta kita takata kita tum kita takata kita tum kita takata kita tum nam dita dinginnatum ta tak kita takata kita tum tak kita takata kita tum tak kita takata kita tum nam dita dinginnatum ta tadik kita takata kita tum tadik kita takata kita tum tadik kita takata kita tum tak kita takata kita tum tak kita takata kita tum tak kita takata kita tum kita takata kita tum kita takata kita tum voilà.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the question and for that amazing way to respond. And now we're gonna go ahead with a question from Francisco, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Subhashini. It's really amazing. Really appreciate your work and that you are sharing your knowledge with us. Please, I might have understood the word in a wrong way, but it was liam, this universal thing, liam.
Liam, yes.
Liam. So yeah, I was having a question regarding that. So you said that when you dance, when you sing, you are responding to liam. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and this is the kind of universal rhythm. So wondering what do you think about, for instance, street life in some part of India or maybe in another like very busy city? Do you have a word for describing that type of rhythm? Is different from liam? Does it resonate with universal rhythm or not? No, just wanted to know your opinion about that. And also to repeat, thank you. It's an amazing topic. You bring many ideas and important things. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. It's actually a fantastic question because liam is basically the undercurrent of the natural way of living. So things like seasons, things like the sunset and the sunrise, things like the animals, and basically things that do not pertain to intellectual quests, if I may use that word very carefully, but basically things that do not have to do with human thought. So that is liam, and even that is of course a human thought, coming to think of it, because we created liam, we think liam exists. So I'm sure Juan can talk about that later. But the way I see it, the things that we see on the streets, let's say street life or everyday life, I would probably put it under the category of talam, which is man-made, and that something is resonant with the liam itself. So liam exists, and within that there is talam, and within the talam there is different facets of life, and as we go along we have different talams that resonate with our feeling at that moment, according to the seasons around us, or according to the surroundings around us, or according to, I don't know, whether it's sunny or whether we are threatened or whether we are happy or things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
All right.
It make it more complex now, because now I have the taram. Taram is the
talam. Talam is what I was counting and beating and all that. So talam is like the specific the thing that pertains to what the creation of the percussion thing itself. But liam is beyond the talam. Liam is what actually dictates the talam in the first place, as I see it.
And for instance, the rhythm of a street, it will be taram? Or
Yes.
it could be conceptualized as Taran?
I would consider it Talam. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We're gonna go now to the next question. It's by Richard. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, Richard. Nice to see you here.
Subhashini. Oh, I must say, as a Trinidadian, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Not so much a question, but I was very interested in your take on teaching in Trinidad and moving the Bharatanatyam from its religious context. Because it was quite interesting, because as a Trinidadian dancer, I have encountered Bharatanatyam and Kathak in Trinidad. And in order to open it out to a wider community, it has come down less to, okay, if I'm going to teach it to somebody of African descent who is interested in learning, I can't make it a part of life, because it's not a part of his everyday life. But as a dance, I can take that pure dance with connotations and parallels to the religious, but in teaching it and going forward, it's a purely artistic form. And that's interesting, because I've done Indian classical dance with 3 different teachers that has been their response to teaching it. And then being in Trinidad, we're very into mixing. So, 2 of us, we've talked about chutney, and chutney is, of course, Indian classical dance.
That was my thesis.
with our soca, with our calypso. And, and that's something that has happened to us layering. We have something in Trinidad called fusion, which is literally a dance form fusing African dance with Indian classical dance. That's purely artistic. It's not a social construct at all. It's something that we dancers did to show a Trinidadian identity. That here we have all these influences. We have Spanish influences. We have dances of a Spanish influence, French, African, Indian. So it was quite interesting, as you've rightly said, the changes of, I guess, traditional dance for the diaspora, and how do we hold on to that, but then again, to how do we allow them to grow? So this was really, really very interesting. And again, to point to your Trinidadian way of life, even I encounter it now, because now I've lived more than half my life out of Trinidad. When I go back, I'm like, oh wow, okay, I need to slow down, because this is not happening today at all. I cannot bring my foreign thoughts and way of life and movement and timing into that. My friends are like, Richard, what's going on? I'm like, yeah. So it's really interesting, even for Trinidadian who hasn't lived to go back, and even performing or teaching, you have to change, because again, as you said, it's so different. But thank you so much for this. This is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much for that input, Richard. It's very interesting you should say that, because I've always been talking about it only in the Indian context, because even in India, I think Bharatanatyam has undergone a huge change. And this is something I've always been passionately vocal about, the fact that the art form was forcibly taken from a community of practitioners and brought onto the stage, recontextualized onto stage, and the traditional practitioners are not really given that kind of space anymore. So Bharatanatyam has already undergone a huge change from being a religious to becoming a more secularized, stage-oriented dance form. And now the form is even more twice removed from its original reality of being a ritualistic dance. So it only makes sense for it to transform itself according to its environment. So, yeah.
Thank you for that response. And we're gonna finish with 2 last questions. The next one will be by Tristan. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. It was such a beautiful talk. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I was curious, when you originally started talking about your time in Trinidad, you were saying that you were working with, I guess, students with mental health conditions. And so my question to you, I guess, in this quarantine life that we're having to live is, these dance practices. Are you exploring the idea of how dance is like this embodied knowledge in a way, and how, you said that how the mind works via the senses. Is there like that connection in your research of what you've seen and how dance helps express things that are going on in the mind and help to slow it down or things like that?
Perfect. Thank you for your question, Tristan. Just to clarify, it was not dancers with mental health issues. The dance that we put up, the dance drama that we put up, it's actually my friend Alana Raja's idea, and I assisted her because I was there in Trinidad at that time. It was to do with understanding depression and how we can overcome depression and how we all talk about it and how we form communities. And we tried to explore it through the idiom of Bharatanatyam, which was itself a challenge because like Richard said, and like I've already said, Bharatanatyam has always been a very religious art form, and for us to sort of remove it from that context and put it onto another context was the bigger challenge. And I think in a way, this embodied knowledge that you talk about is the basic foundation, the artistic foundation of the art form itself that we use to our advantage. So I do not think it went beyond that embodied knowledge of knowing the art form. And we didn't really change the basics of it, if that answers your question.
Yes, I think it definitely does. I was just, like I said, I was just curious. I'm glad that the guy, I can't remember his name, who asked the question about, taking something out of the religious context that it is and kind of transplanting it in another context so that it can, form its own life and create its own culture within that context. I think that's beautiful. Like I said, I was just curious to see, how it, like you said, for example, when you're making the sounds, it's supposed to come from your belly, right? So it's just like including all of your body and expressing yourself in a way that's so free and so inclusive, So I guess I was just curious about that.
Right. Perfect.
Perfect. And now we're gonna close this Q&A session with a question from Sumeda, please.
I think my video is not working, so I'll just send, I'll just send voice. Yeah, super amazing. I felt so, coming from India, I'm like, wow, this is a new system altogether. I have no clue about it. So
I would think that of Kathak, to be honest.
Exactly. I was actually I was very curious coming from Kathak's point of view. And so I have never, ever actually looked into it's a very subjective question probably. From here where there are I don't know whether there are any works done with this idea of Parhant and Konnakol. Is it the same or is it something different completely? The whole idea of Parhant that we have in Kathak also, the whole recitation of, speaking mnemonic syllables, recitation of mnemonic, which is what I think. I find a lot of similarity here, firstly. And and I was also very interested to, it sort of came out from a very personal conversation here with a friend today itself, where this whole mental health issues coming up, and I feel very, so nice that you have actually brought in a very secular perspective here. It's a very new perspective to bring this aspect of Bharatanatyam in a dance therapeutic setting in a way. I feel it's very intriguing. It would be because it is always this Indian body or a Bharatanatyam body or Kathak body or any kind of a classical dancing body in India is considered beautiful. Beauty is something, it has to be beautiful in the eyes of the observer. The fact that you're bringing these elements, it's very interesting. Would be to explore topics around that, which sort of can be as abstract as anxiety, as abstract something like pain, which I don't see it in at all. I feel in the texts of you already have seen it, these pain, pleasure, anxiety, stress. How does one, deal? And then, of course, you're experimenting with already. So I will just input from my end that I felt. But yeah, it was beautiful to I think we can always talk about it later, but
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
thank you for that, Sumedha. Interestingly, the idea was brought up by a Trinidadian and not an Indian. It was Alana who came up with the idea of working with mental issues for and depression and things in Bharatanatyam. Unsurprisingly, because in India, I feel like we are still so caught with certain traditional systems of thought that we do not want to take dance beyond its borders somehow. So I'm really glad she experimented with it, and I'm really glad I was a part of that experiment as well. So, and in India, there have been certain measures, and this is another thing that I would probably leave open to the audience as well. I've always doubted the how much classical dance can actually work with certain issues, because it has had such a fixed idiom over such a long period of time, and has had such a very limited audience for itself, that I do not know how much of it can actually communicate certain things that are pertaining to social issues or mental health issues or any other issues, or even discrimination and things like that. And what is the reachability of such things, even if we do portray it, and if we have to break even the stage scenario and bring it to the street so that people can actually watch this and it can become a common idiom rather than something about high culture and elitism. So this is another discussion that I'll probably just open up to you all, so you can think about it later.
Yeah.
Thank you, Subhashini. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. I think I speak on behalf of everyone in this session. Thanks for this wonderful presentation, Subhashini, and thanks also to Juan, who was making the first presentation of the day. Thanks for all the participants that were able to join. I want to speak for Francisco and I, who are the organizers of this event. We want to invite you for tomorrow, in case you also have the chance to join us. We're going to have two presentations. One from Karine Planke. She's going to be talking about rhythm and the ritual nexus of structure and flow. And after that, we're going to have a presentation by Nayara Rota, and she's going to speak about rhythmic variations in the movements and musical accompaniment of belly dance. So it will be at the same time. If you can join us, that will be awesome. But other than that, thank you, everybody. Subhashini, do you want to say anything before to kind of close this session?
Yes, I would just like to thank everybody who's here. Thank you so much for coming for this. This is my first webinar, so I was a little nervous. And I was also nervous because I'm not usually a very linear person. I usually just go with the flow. So for me to sort of constrict according to time and sort of make sure I say everything I wanted to say was pretty challenging. And you've all been very incredibly patient and kind. So thank you very much for that. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you. See you tomorrow, everybody. Thank you. Suba, I'm sorry, Francisco, were you going to say something?
I'll make you the host. How do I make you the host?
No, you can continue, Jorge, no worries.
Look at you. Bye.
Nandri.
Right, I'm ending this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Subhashini. It was brilliant.
You're the best.
If I leave the meeting, Jorge, do you become the host automatically? How does this work?
I think so.
All right, so I'll just leave, and so you can become the host.
So Jorge,
oh yeah.
shall I call you later?
Oh, wow.
Of course.
Okay, I'm gonna leave the meeting now. Thank you very much, Jorge, for organizing this and hosting the meeting.